Erev Tov Rabotai, we are continuing with our Mishna Yomi, Masechet Chagigah. We are up to Perek Bet, Mishnah Bet. Today's Mishnayot should be Le'elu Nishmat, Neria ben Svetlana, Aranbai, ben Eliyahu ben Burcha Israelov, Menuchatam began Eden, Amen. And Le'avdir ben Chaim Lechaim, V'Refuah Shelemav, Daniel Shalom ben Rosa, Betoch Shah Cholei Israel. The Mishnah returns to the subject of the personal offerings brought on Yom Tov. Before a personal offering is slaughtered, the owner places his hands on the head of the animal and leans down on it. This is known as smicha, leaning. When doing smicha, the owner prays. In the case of an offering that is brought to atone for a sin, he confesses the sin. In the case of a shlamim offering that is brought as a voluntary gift, he praises Hashem. And this is what the Rambam writes in Erechot Maaseh HaKorbanot, chapter 3, halachot 14 and 15. The Mishnah cites a dispute now as to whether smicha is performed on Yom Tov. Yossi ben Yoezer omer shelo lismoch. Yossi ben Yoezer says not to perform smicha on an offering on Yom Tov because leaning on an animal is rabbinically forbidden on Yom Tov. The sages prohibited riding an animal on Shabbat or Yom Tov because they were afraid that as a person is riding, he might break a branch off a tree to use as a whip, which is a biblical transgression. This rabbinic prohibition includes not only riding, but any direct use of an animal's body. The act of smicha is therefore forbidden on Yom Tov because the person leans down on the animal with all his strength, using it to support his weight. Yossi ben Yoezer holds that smicha does not have to be performed immediately before the slaughter of the offering, or even on the same day. Therefore, when one offers an animal on Yom Tov, Ishamei Chagigah, smicha must be done the day before. Yossi ben Yochanan omer lismoch, but Yossi ben Yochanan says it is proper to perform smicha on Yom Tov because the sages lifted this prohibition in the case of offerings brought on Yom Tov. Yossi ben Yochanan rules that smicha must be performed right before the offering is slaughtered. Therefore, when an offering is brought on Yom Tov, since its smicha must be done that day, the sages lifted their prohibition of using animals on Yom Tov and permitted smicha. And this is how Rashi explains in Masechet Chagigah, page 7b. Now, these two sages were the first of 5 generations of Zugot, pairs of sages who led the Jewish people. For a period of time during the era of the Second Temple, the Jewish people were led by pairs of sages known as Zugot, pairs. One sage of each pair was the Nasi, the president of the Sanhedrin, the highest Jewish court, and the other was the Abed, chief of the Sanhedrin, who was the deputy of the Nasi. The first pair were the sages named above, Yossi ben Yoezer and Yossi ben Yochanan. They were followed by those that were going to say, Yehoshua ben Parachia and Nitai Arbeli, Yehuda ben Tabai and Shimon ben Shatach, Shmai and Naftalion, Hillel and Shammai. The Mishnah records that this dispute continued through the 5 generations. Yehoshua ben Parachia omer shelo lismoch, Nitai Arbeli omer lismoch. The second generation, Yehoshua ben Parachia says not to perform smicha on Yom Tov, and Nitai Arbeli says to perform smicha on Yom Tov. Yehuda ben Tamai omer shelo lismoch, Shimon ben Shatach omer lismoch. The third generation, Yehuda ben Tabai says not to perform smicha on Yom Tov, and Shimon ben Shatach says to perform smicha on Yom Tov. Shammai omer lismoch, Naftalion omer shelo lismoch. The fourth generation, Shmaya says to perform smicha on Yom Tov, and Naftalion says not to perform smicha on Yom Tov. Hillel and Menachem no nechleku. In the 5th generation, Hillel and Menachem did not argue about it. Rav explains Menachem never gave his opinion on the matter. Yatsa Menachem dichnas Shammai. However, Menachem left the Sanhedrin and Shammai entered in his place, at which point the dispute began again. Shammai omer shelo lismoch, Hillel omer lismoch. Shammai says not to perform smicha on Yom Tov, and Hillel says to perform smicha on Yom Tov. The Mishnah gives the titles of each sage in the pairs named above. Harishunim hayu nisiim ushnim lahem av bedin. The first ones mentioned in each pair were the nisim, were the presidents of the courts, and the second ones mentioned were the abedin, chief of the court, deputy to the president. An exception to the Mishnah statement is the final pair of sages, Shammai and Hillel. Shammai, who was mentioned first, was the Abedin, while Hillel, who was mentioned second, was the Nasi. However, since the Mishnah already listed Hillel before Menachem, and Shammai took Menachem's place, it is evident that Hillel was the Nasi and Shammai was the Abedin. And that is in Rabotai Mishnah Bet. Mishnah Gimel now teaches that the students of Shammai, Bet Shammai, and the students of Hillel, Bet Hillel, continued the previous dispute about Smicha and Yom Tov, and they also disagreed about whether the Olat Reya may be brought in Yom Tov. As we mentioned in the introduction to chapter 1, every man must bring 2 offerings, the Shalmei Chagigah and the Olat Reya, and Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot. Bet Shammai Amrim, Bet Shammai say, Mevi'in Shlamim Ven Tzumchin Alehem. We may bring the festival Shlamim offerings, the Shalmei Chagigah and Yom Tov, but their meat is eaten, but we may not perform smicha on them on Yom Tov. Now, a shalamim offering is eaten by its owner, his family, and guests. Therefore, although melachot slaughtering must be done to bring an offering, the shalamei chagigah may be brought in Yom Tov, because melacha is generally permitted on Yom Tov for the purpose of preparing food. But again, Bet Shammai follows the view of their teacher Shammai, who ruled in the previous Mishnah that smicha is forbidden on Yom Tov. Avalo olot. However, we may not bring the festival Olah offerings, the Olah Riyah and Yom Tov, because they are entirely burned on the altar and they are not eaten. Rather, we bring them after Yom Tov. The verse states in Bamidbar, chapter 29, verse 35, Atzeret Yalachem, it shall be a festival to you. The words to you are seemingly unnecessary. From this, Bet Shammai learned that only work necessary for you may be done in Yom Tov, but not work that is only for the altar. Therefore, the Olat Riyah, Pesach, and Sukkot is brought during Chol HaMoed of the festival, and the Olat Riyah, Shavuot, a one-day festival, is brought during the following 6 days. Bet Hillel Omrim, Bet Hillel say, Mivi'in Shalamim ve'olot v'sumchin alehem. We may bring both the festival Shalamim and the festival Olah offerings on Yom Tov, and we perform smicha on them on Yom Tov. The Torah describes Yom Tov as Atzeret L'Adonai Elohecha, a festival for Hashem your God, in Dvarim chapter 16, verse 8. Bet Hillel derived from this verse that any festival offering brought for Hashem, meaning for Hashem's altar, which includes the Olat Riyah, may be brought on Yom Tov. Now the Mishnah refers only to the personal offerings that are brought for the festival. All agree that other Shalamim and Olah offerings which can be brought after Yom Tov may not be brought on Yom Tov. Everyone agrees that all the communal festival offerings are brought on Yom Tov, even Olah offerings, for the Torah specifically commands us to do so. And again, Bet Hillel followed the view of their teacher Hillel, who stated in the previous Mishnah that smicha is performed on Yom Tov. And that is an abotai of today's Mishna Yomi. Baruch Adonai Leolam. Amen v'amen.